Hi, I'm Jason, and today we're going to be reviewing the Moondrop SSRs, which is Moondrop's latest waifu and biggest disappointment so far. So disclaimer before we start the review, the Moondrop SSRs, I bought them by myself with my own money from some store on Tokopedia, which is a local e-commerce here in Indonesia. I am not affiliated to any store or any brand, and this review is completely of my own opinion. So, it took quite a while for me to do this review, simply because I actually wasn't sure what to think about the SSRs. I had my doubts on how these sounded, and I wanted to just make sure of what some other people think, especially the people that I trust in terms of what's it called, sound impressions and such. So after I got some feedback from them and looking at how popular these have become, and just that they've simply have become the answer for every possible question in local audio forums and such, and all the glowing reviews on Headfire and such, I just had to put this review out because to temper expectations, because these to me are extremely bad, and they might actually damage your hearing because of the way they're tuned. So just to give you a TLDR, so the Moondrop SSRs are tuned towards a diffuse field target. So what that essentially means is that it's a flat sound, completely flat sound signature. There's quite a bit of an emphasis in the upper mids to treble region, a mountain of emphasis, I would say, especially in these SSRs, and that's I'll put the graph around like bottom right here, what based on what Clinical's measurements are showing, and the increase from the mid-range to the upper mid-range is insane. There's a 15 decibel increase in frequency response there, and it makes these IEMs sound so shouty that nothing just sounds correct. And these can hurt your hearing, because before we get into more detail, I'll just say why I had to put this out. Because these IEMs, the way that they're tuned, they're fully neutral except for this upper mid to treble region, and the way that these are being presented to the entry-level market. Lots of people tend to calibrate sound volume based on bass, and that's based off of my experience with my circle of friends and some people I've met through meets, local audio meets. And what they tend to do is the frequency that they use to match volumes is usually bass. So, and especially for new budding audiophiles, the first thing they will notice is bass usually. And if you provide them with this IEM, it will damage their hearing, because by the time that you have increased the bass to such a level that you will perceive normally as what most budget IEMs or most mainstream IEMs provide, these will have damaged your hearing with how emphasized the upper mid-range is. This, I would say, is a very dangerous IEM, and especially with how hot they are now being recommended everywhere, left, right, top and bottom. I just had to put this review out to temper expectations, and I'll probably clickbait the hell out of the title of this video, and I will just say that these will damage your hearing. This is probably a topic that should have been brought up more often in audio forums on how you should maintain a safe listening volume. Having tinnitus like I do is not a fun experience. Once you get it, you will not be able to get rid of it. And you don't want to get it just because you listen to some guy saying that these should be good for bass at IEMs, which I do think that the bass on these are good, but they are not enough, and by the time that you crank it up to the amount that you would say is a good amount, you would have been, you're getting one step closer to deafness because of the upper mid emphasis. So I'll elaborate more. So we'll start going to more of the details of the sound. We'll start with bass like we usually do. The bass in the Moondrop SSRs is just flat. There's not much emphasis at all. The sub bass rumble is there definitely. You can still hear it. There's not much slam, unfortunately. So If you like a lot of slam in your sub bass, avoid these. Mid bass, it has some nice punch, not a lot of it. I would say that this is probably quite a bit less for a dynamic driver. I would expect more. So EDM and such just doesn't really sound that much fun on these unless you crank up the volume, which you shouldn't. And by the way, when I keep seeing this being recommended, if you don't have enough bass on the SSRs, don't just simply vent tape mod them. I don't know exactly what the vents on the SSR are used for, but in the case of the Ibaso IT01s and the IT00s, the vents that were there for that IEM were used to relieve pressure from the driver. So if you cover these vents up, you might have the potential of breaking these drivers and causing imbalance issues. It will introduce driver flex, which causes imbalance issues, and then you'll have an imbalanced IEM, and then you'll just lose money, right? Okay, going back into bass is quite fast. You are seeing a trend here. I think its texture is not much of it is there, but at least it has its speed. So if you like to listen to fast music, this might be a bonus point for you. Now, going to the mid-range, because there isn't much of an emphasis in the bass region, the mid-range lacks weight. Male vocals just don't have this grunt. They sound kind of pinched, toned down. They don't really sound good grunts, and all these sound lifeless. And the trend doesn't get better with female vocals, because this is the biggest offender of all. The upper mid emphasis on the Moondrop SSRs are horrendous. They're so bad. Some engineer in Moondrop had the option to go with, oh, I'll just do I'll do a decent diffuse field tuning. But then he decided one day that, there's a knob to just make it absolutely horrendous. He just cranked it up to maximum, and this is what you got. The mid-range emphasis on the Moondrop SSRs make them so shouty that any female vocals that you will hear from these will just strike your ears. In my case, it made me winch a lot of times. I had to be prepared to listen to female vocals when I wore the SSRs. It was like going into war with sound, and it might seem like exaggerating, but that's just my experience. And with how emphasized this upper mid-range is, it's not enjoyable. Listen to something like even Diana Krall, which doesn't have the highest pitch voice of all female vocalists that I know of, was quite unbearable most of the time. And listening to something like Aymar or J-pop, or really anyone who has higher pitch voices, or listen to something for violins like for example like Lindsey Sterling, it just became unbearable. It gave me a headache. I couldn't hear much longer using the SSRs. I just couldn't stand it. And note weight in general also isn't that good. So there's not a lot of good things going on in the mid-range here. To whoever keeps on recommending these for vocals, just stop. These are not it. That's probably a lot of accumulation of these cases is what brought me into having to publish this review, even though I really didn't want to review this because I don't like these IEMs. I normally only want to review things that I think are either interesting or I think are good, so that more people know of it. I don't really usually want to do items that I think are bad. It's like a heartbreak. You see? Shape of heartbreak. I really love Moondrop, I really do. I even have the Blessing 2s here, and these are my dailies. But we'll get to that later after we go to treble and all those things. So now we're going to treble, and it doesn't get better here also. So the treble here is also emphasized quite a bit. It's quite sharp. It isn't as sharp as, let's say, something like the case that Knowledge Zenith Z6, so that's fine. I can still bear with it sometimes, but sometimes cymbals just become a bit too much for me on the SSRs. It becomes splashy sometimes. Speed is okay most of the time though, but you can definitely not hear Dragon Force with these. Although they don't become exactly a complete mush, but you still can't listen to Dragon Force with the SSRs. The treble region, because it's quite a bit on par with the what's it called, upper mids. It's quite emphasized. I think it gives some nice airiness. So the sound just seems quite wide, which is what we're gonna get next into. So we're gonna talk about probably the most impressive part about the SSRs here. I can give them huge credits here. So I think the soundstage of the SSRs here, I think are quite wide, they're quite large. So if this were to be my head, the soundstage of the SSRs are just about this size. They're just around my head, sometimes even out of my head depending on the songs that I'm playing. And I think that's quite a feat to achieve in this price range, which I probably haven't mentioned. These are just $40. Okay, so now talking about soundstage, we can't. Now we're gonna just talk about imaging. Imaging, I think, is already it's quite good actually. So I can predict instruments where they are coming from in like a 30-ish degree range, which is I think quite good for an IEM, especially this price range. I normally am not able to perceive imaging quite as good as other people might be. So 30-ish degrees I think is quite good. So now we'll talk a bit about comfort and isolation. So the comfort of the SSRs are a bit odd. So at least on my ears, which are I have medium-sized ears. So because of the way that these are shaped and how the cable is, whenever I'm wearing them, they tend to just get pulled up and break the seal. So if I don't use some other ear tips, like these are actually acknowledged Zenith Starline ear tips, but in first. If I use the stock ear tips that come with the Moondrop SSRs, like these are the stock ear tips actually, they just keep breaking the seal, and well, you don't get any bass at all at that point, and the sound will just get even wonkier. Isolation on the SSRs, not a lot of it is there. There's a huge vent here, huge vent there. If you can see, if my camera will zoom, not zoom, focus, please focus camera, yeah, that's a huge vent. So if you use these outside in a busy street or something, you might not be able to hear a lot of things, especially the bass region. And please, for the love of God, if you cannot hear bass while you're outside while wearing the Moondrop SSRs, don't crank up the volume more than you would normally listen to. Get to a quieter place, save your hearing. Okay, now I'm gonna talk a bit about what comes in the package. So not a lot of things actually come in the package. So you get this box which has Moondrop's signature waifu per IEM. So for every IEM or earbud or whatever they release, any other audio product that they usually have some sort of waifu character that they make. And I've seen some people actually buy these simply because of the image on the box. They just want to collect the box. I don't know why. I would not, if I were into that, I would probably just print it, but I'm not the target audience, so I can't say. But okay, not a lot of things to say. Oh, they actually show the frequency response here. That's interesting. Huh. But yeah, it's gonna be hard to zoom in from here, and I don't know what kind of equipment they use to measure the frequency response. I didn't realize that was there actually. But anyway, so this is what you get in the box. So you get 4 pairs of ear tips. These are the spares. I have the originals here. So these are M size. You get S, M, L, and then something in between, I believe. And you get a small pouch, which I'm not sure what kind of material this is of. This feels something like what you would make raincoats out of. I'm not sure if it's waterproof or not. I don't want to test that. But yeah, that's about all that you get from accessories from the Moondrop SSRs. So now we'll do just a bit quick of a comparison. I think any other IEM in this budget price range is probably better, especially if you have the Blonde BL03s and something like the Tin T2s. Even the Moondrop spaceships. So this is what makes me absolutely angry. So the Moondrop spaceships, the originals, the thing that they are supposed to be based off of, were a lot better than these. So the Moondrop spaceships, I absolutely adored. I loved them. They were small, they were comfortable, I could wear them anywhere, and at some point in time I had the option. I usually brought them to the office with my Andromedas. And what tends to happen is that I would more often than not actually pull out the spaceships compared to the Andromedas. I could wear the Andromedas, but I tend to just go for the spaceships. I thought that they were more convenient. I could just plug it into anywhere and they would sound great. And they were light, comfortable, couldn't really feel them in my ears. Sound signature wasn't really offensive, although they measure quite similarly to the SSR in terms of the mid to the treble, but um, they had a bit more bass, and I think from what I remember, I don't have a head-to-head comparison right now because the spaceships are currently being used by my sibling. Um, the spaceships actually are less shouty than the SSRs, and that's probably why I'm just irrationally angry about how the SSR just became such a huge failure. So comparing this to something like the Tin-T2s, so the Tin-T2s I would say is a proper budget neutral IEM. Up until now, I don't think there's any good competitors out there which do the same kind of signature the way that Tin does. So the Tin-T2s have a lot less upper mid emphasis. It's quite a bit more neutral, flat. Bass I think has better punch, has better slam. In the sub bass also, mid range sounds a bit weightier, so it doesn't sound as lifeless as the SSRs. And treble I believe is feels a bit more refined than the SSRs. Comparing this to the Blonde BL03s, if you have the Blonde BL03s, you want to, if you're thinking about going to the SSRs, you like bass, absolutely don't do that. The Blonde BL03s are a V-shape IEM. The treble on the Blonde BL03s are actually, I think, is quite a bit soft compared to what the SSRs provide. These might feel a bit more detailed, but believe me, the Blonde BL03s I think provide more than enough detail than you would need in this budget price range. I don't think you can get much more detail than what the Tin-T2 or the Blonde BL03s actually provide. So I believe they're actually on par in terms of technicalities wise. It's just easier to hear on something that sounds more neutral, for example like the Tin-T2s usually. And the Blonde BL03s have a much nicer mid-range. So if you like the weighty mid-range, the weighty mid-range on the Blonde BL03s, avoid the SSRs. Avoid. Just throw these out the bin. Don't even bother putting them into your search history. Like, don't look these up even. Even delete this video from your watch history if necessary. Forget about the SSRs. The only problem I see with the blondes is just the comfort issues, which I get. Some people are unable to get a proper fit, like I did with the blondes. But yeah. So then, Jason, where does the SSR sit? To whom should the SSRs be for? I have no idea actually. Someone who has trouble perceiving upper mids, probably? I don't know. Maybe. Or if you want to EQ the SSRs, I EQ'd them with my ES Studios ES100, so through their app. I reduced the treble, the upper mid region from 3 to 4K minus by 6 decibels, and I increased the bass slightly in the 250 and 150 hertz region. I increased them just by a couple of dBs, and then they started sounding acceptable. So if you've already bought the SSRs, you cannot afford any other IEM, I would suggest probably trying some EQ options on your Android phone or something. Aside from that, if you're thinking of buying the SSRs, just don't. Save your ears, save your wallet, unless you've heard them and liked them. And please check whether or not the volume has been matched properly to your other IEMs that you're currently listening to. Which, by the way, you should volume match based on, normally what I do is volume match based on the mid-range or a 1K note if I'm unsure of. I think that provides a way better reference in terms of how IEMs sound compared to each other. If you like these, then by any means necessary, stay with them. If you already have them, if you feel like something is lacking in the SSRs, yeah, there's a lot lacking. So yeah, I'll leave what Brian thinks right about here in the video. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the SSRs. Like if you liked it, comment what you think, and subscribe if you want more content like this. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.